Good evening and welcome to Money Talks and to our special edition on China's new exchange rate. I'm your host, Timothy Pope. When China changed the way it sets the renminbi exchange rate last week, it also changed the exchange rate itself, and the resulting fall in the renminbi affected just about everybody at home and abroad. Some of the people most concerned about China's exchange rates are the people who make, buy and sell the country's automobiles. The imports aren't selling all that well, and after last week's devaluation, they just got more expensive. On the other hand, local car makers have faced a tough time in China's export markets this year. A weaker Chinese currency is expected to help them, however, because they just got cheaper. But is it really going to make all that much difference? How does it all add up? We went to speak to the people who make the cars.
Geely was one of the 7 Chinese car manufacturers which made the Fortune 500 last year, and the only privately owned company among them. The company sells cars in 31 countries around the world, but lately they're not selling nearly enough of them. As of the first half of this year, Geely exported fewer than 18,000 units, a 48% decrease year-on-year. Geely once accounted for more than 10% of the total car exports from China, but that was down to 8.4% by this June. The company says the depreciation of the Chinese currency should have a positive impact on its exports, but since the depreciation only took place last week, the impact remains uncertain.
从国际市场上来看呢，人民币汇率坚挺确实会对汽车出口的业务有一定的影响。那我们倒觉得这是一个利好，但是跟其他的一些国家相比，比如说日本。日元在过去2-3年一直在一个贬值的通道里面，而且累计贬值的幅度是非常大的。这样的话，日本的这个汽车品牌在国际市场的销售终端价格上可调整的幅度就非常大。这样的话，对中国这个自主品牌汽车的影响是比较大的。
The weaker RMB is expected to help stimulate more car exports, especially since China's car exports were down a total of 14% in the first 7 months of this year. Iran has become China's largest car export destination, taking 22% of China's exports. 18% of exported cars went to ASEAN, and 16% went to Africa. Geely's export markets include Russia, Ukraine, Egypt, and Brazil. Yang says the fall of the Chinese currency will make the prices of made-in-China cars more favorable. However, since many of these regions are politically unstable, even a decrease of prices cannot guarantee a rise in purchases.
比如说，像乌克兰原来就是我们销量很大的一个国家，一年可以卖1万多辆车，但突然发生了这个克里米亚的这个事情，那整个这个市场就处在一种动荡的阶段，消费者这个消费信心是严重不足的，所以就他们不愿意去买车，现在可能只能卖几千辆。我们本来觉得乌克兰市场今年如果没有战争的话，可能能卖到1万多辆，将近2万辆汽车。
While local car makers are facing a tough time in foreign markets, the domestic market has had its problems too. July saw Chinese consumers buy the fewest passenger vehicles in 17 months, extending a slump in the world's largest auto market. Automakers are now offering discounts as high as 18%, but even that has failed to revive demand. Foreign cars still dominate China's passenger car market, but their sales are not doing well either. They fell 23% in the first half of this year. Jingying Sheng from TNS says that the slide in the RMB exchange rate against the US dollar means more expensive imported cars, which will further hurt that side of the business.
随着这一波汇率的这种调整的话，那就使得说今年下半年或者说明年整个进口车的这种车市的那种的话，就其实大家都会持一些相对比较谨慎保守的这种态度。有很多经销商因为它的这个车型是直接在保税区提车的时候，即使结算成因为到岸价的这个概念，因为到岸价它直接计实体，对经销商来说的话，其它的损失就是即刻体现的。进口车的经销商会出现比如说经营上的困难，甚至说倒闭这种状态，而经销商这种网点的缩减的话，对整个其他的这种进口车的这种市场来说的话，本来就是一个更不好的消息。
Sluggish sales of imported cars this year has made room for local car brands. Jin says that if the depreciation of the yuan continues, some imported cars may face even bigger challenges from local brands.
雷诺啊，像斯巴鲁啊这样的一些品牌，因为它的整个车型的这种价位段跟国产车这种价位段是比较对应的，所以也就是说它的这个正面竞争当中，其实就雷诺的这种进口车价格必然在国产车面前价格优势会被削弱掉，这个是比较明显的。但是如果说对于像奥迪啊、奔驰、宝马这些，它既有国产车又有进口车这些企业来说的话，其实这个问题就影响不是特别大，因为它基本上说是一些高价位的车型仍然是进口的，低价位的中低价位的车型仍然是国产的。
Even before the devaluation, Chinese-made cars were taking an increasing share of the domestic market, up 3.7% in the first 7 months of the year. In a market with such tough competition, even a small devaluation can make a difference, however. And Chinese automakers are hoping they can count on that in both their domestic and their foreign markets.
Right after foreign cars, more and more well-off Chinese are thinking about foreign houses, buying abroad for their children to live in during university and then for they themselves to live in during retirement. But how do you do that with a devalued renminbi? It turns out it might be a little harder now, but in fact, the falling renminbi makes people want to do it even more. Let's take a look at the listings.
Zhou Ting bought her first house in Melbourne about a year ago, mainly for investment. She wants to buy 2 more Aussie homes just to make sure she's got all the Australian universities covered, but also because she's more certain than ever it's not wise to put all her eggs in one basket.
因为我想更加快的能够把这个资产先配置出去，因为我觉得人民币贬值，我当时就是有这么一个预期的，所以最近这段时间人民币贬值也并不意外。做这个投资呢，其实这很重要的一个考虑呢，也是一个分散人民币资产的一个风险。我是不想我手头所有的，不管是现金理财，或是房产，或者是其他的股权，都是以人民币结算的。这样的话，如果人民币进入贬值通道，我就很危险嘛。
Zhou would now need to pay 38,000 yuan more for a property worth 1 million Australian dollars than she would have had to pay a month ago, thanks to the weakening yuan. She regrets that she didn't buy earlier.
上周的那个人民币的这个波动嘛，让我担心说它是不是进入一个贬值通道的一个信号。可能它不会一下子贬得很厉害，但是我相信有可能会像温水煮青蛙一样的，慢慢的，通货膨胀加上一个人民币的贬值嘛。因为将来可能都是要买的嘛，所以说何不早一点把这个配置好？因为澳大利亚房子也是在涨的呀。
It's not just Zhou who's planning to buy more properties overseas. Lanny Xu at Ironfish, a Shanghai-headquartered consultancy for the Australian property market, says customer visits to his company have more than doubled since last week. His success rate of sealing deals has jumped from 50% to more than 80%.
Now we see the increasing number of callings, increased number of requests of the appointment, and increasing inquiries of the consultation. And the people really feel it's time to think seriously. In the past, probably they're just thinking what I can do, give me a bit of research, take away to think about. But now they probably come to the stage of the making final decision.
Even with the RMB's devaluation last week, Australian priced assets are still selling at very enticing rates, and better rates than many think they may see in the future. According to American commercial real estate company CBRE, Melbourne and Sydney are first choices among potential immigrants from China, selling for prices similar to those in Shanghai. CBRE also says it is likely that Chinese buyers will speed up U.S. purchases for the same reason they are speeding up Australia purchases. Concerned the RMB may fall even more later. Chinese buyers invested more than $10 billion in overseas properties last year, a 25% increase from a year earlier. In fact, they are already expanding investment to smaller European countries and to lower-tier cities in the U.S.
Speaking of cities in the US, if you're not buying foreign cars or foreign houses, you might at least be buying foreign tours. The effective devaluation of the renminbi came right in the middle of an important period for everyone, the summertime holiday season. China now has more outbound tourists than any country in the world. Are everyone's holidays about to become more expensive? Are you going to have to change your vacation plans? Let's check in.
If you can't decide which country to go to for your next holiday, the latest Chinese guide is Travel by the Rate. The value of the yuan went up by over 20% against the Japanese yen in the past year, and that made Japan the hottest holiday destination for Chinese tourists in June. The slumping value of the ruble also made Russia a popular choice. The number of Chinese tourists there grew year-on-year by 67% in the first quarter of this year. So what's happened with the US market? Well, the yuan is down more than 4% against the dollar, but so far there is not much impact on bookings across the Pacific.
因为我去美国主要是度假为主嘛，如果涉及到免税店购物的话，应该不会大批量的购物，所以应该影响不大的。
我觉得买东西的话，反正怎么样都比国内的便宜嘛，所以我觉得我到国外该买的还是会买。
Travel agents agree the exchange rate changes so far are having limited impacts on travelers' expenses. Ctrip, China's largest online travel agency, tells us that people who have already paid for their tours won't have to pay extra. And for those who haven't yet booked, there only will be small changes in price. Only 100 to 200 yuan more for a standard US group tour that costs around 20,000 yuan.
现在客户出国的人数越来越多，那会有一个规模效应，使得携程和当地接受议价的能力在增强。这样的话，我们的服务成本其实是会有一个规模效应是下调的，会对冲掉人民币贬值的这样的一个涨价的因素。
The number of China's outbound tourists exceeded 110 million last year, and a 17% growth is expected for this year. 2 million Chinese tourists visited the US last year, and the States became an even more viable destination when its tourist visas for Chinese were extended to 10 years last November. With more customers, big travel agencies are able to maintain their gross profit without rising prices, even if the exchange rate changes. The average gross profit for the industry is about 8 to 10%, and that for online travel agencies is even better. One industry expert says it's going to stay that way for the foreseeable future.
汇率的波动，无论升值或者贬值，我感觉临界点可能在5%到6%。如果超过了这个，那么价格肯定会有所反应吧。大型的这些旅行社，一般来讲，从报价一直到最后结算，差不多这周期是要6、7个月。他们一般都会考虑到汇率的一个风险，所以他们在跟境外的地接社在做价格协议的时候，签合同的时候，都会把这个因素考虑在里面。长期合作的，它可能有年度的一个协议价，也就是说，不管你汇率怎么变动，我们双方的结算就是按照，比如说人民币6.3这样的一个汇率来结算，所以短期来看，影响并不是太大。
However, Ho says that things could change if the yuan continues to weaken, and we could see changes in travel products prices this November, or as early as the coming national holiday. Although the yuan has regained some 50 basis points this week, several investment banks think that there is room for further devaluation. Credit Suisse and Morgan Stanley both say that $1 could be heading for 6.6 yuan, meaning the yuan could fall by another 3%. Barclays has recently adjusted the exchange rate target for the end of this year from 6.35 yuan for $1 to 6.8. So what changes we will see in outbound tourism will depend on the performance of the yuan and, oh yes, on one other important factor.
出境游啊，汇率是一个方面，但其实不是主要方面。另外，当然还看我们居民的收入，在未来的第4季度以后，会不会有一些增加？比如像现在我们说公务员要加工资啊，或者是不是进入了一些加薪的这么一个周期？如果收入增加，那么这么一点汇率的话，其实对出境旅游影响不是很大。
So it looks like you can still have your holidays where you want, and it won't cost you too much extra for now, just as long as you don't plan on buying out the Big Apple. Countries' currencies and exchange rates, and the way they're used, evolve along with the country's economy. And China's economy has been evolving over the past 25 years, and boy has the renminbi been evolving too. Here's a little history for you.
It all started with the country's economic reforms, when China had a dual exchange rate system. The government set the official rate, but then currency swap centers around the country set their own rates based on that, for companies that needed the yuan for international trade. Nobody really liked that, and neither did the government. Dual rates were scrapped in 1994 when the People's Bank of China set up its first interbank currency market in Shanghai. And if you think last week was bad, the RMB promptly fell by more than 33% overnight. Once the bank got things organized, however, the rate stabilized at around 8.28 to the dollar. From 1997 to 1999, China won wide praise for keeping the yuan stable during the Asian financial crisis, when most of Southeast Asia and Japan saw their currencies slump. The yuan was boxed between 8.277 and 8.28 for about 3 years through frequent central bank intervention. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 and promptly pledged to adjust its foreign exchange regime. The country's huge trade surplus meant that adjustment couldn't come fast enough, however, for the U.S. and other countries who began charging the RMB was undervalued. 2 years later, American senators threatened to levy an across-the-board duty on all Chinese imports of 27.5%. The bill didn't pass, but it worked. China's central bank raised the value of the yuan by more than 200 basis points over the next 2 years. By 2005, however, the American senators were back at it again, threatening more extensive taxes on Chinese imports. And once again, China responded, revaluing the yuan by 2.1% and revising rules governing how its daily rate was set. From now on, the bank said, it would shift to a managed floating exchange rate based on market supply and demand with reference to a basket of currencies. In other words, the RMB's value will be balanced against the value of those other currencies, 11 of them, in fact. That worked fine until the global financial crisis hit in 2008, and many of those 11 currencies began sinking like stones. The RMB needed a lifeboat and found it in the US dollar, to which it was pegged at 6.83. Daily trades could vary within a band of 0.5% above or below this fixed rate. When things calmed down, the basket came back, and that's where things stood until recently, though the trading band was gradually widened, first to 1% up or down each day, and then to 2%. Those percents gradually added up, however. The yuan has risen almost 35% in value in the last 15 years. By the way, those U.S. senators still aren't happy. So, continuing the liberalization, the State Council announced last month that it would broaden the yuan daily trading band once again. No details were disclosed, and analysts expect no more than just another widening, say from 2% to 3%.
Last week's surprise was that the market pushed the yuan down by more than 3% and immediately set off a firestorm of speculation. Was this the start of a currency war? A one-time correction? And what about the impact on China's relations with the International Monetary Fund? And capital outflows, what about those? For a look at that, I was joined earlier by Professor Qian Yuan, Professor of Finance at Shanghai Advanced Institute of Finance at Jiao Tong University. Professor Chen, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Now, there's been a fair amount of sound and fury surrounding the renminbi internationally since the changes were made by the People's Bank of China. What's been the effect internationally on the money markets and on foreign economies?
On the one hand, this is the result of their changing the way RMB can be quoted and traded, right? But if you look at the effects, if you look at the forces behind it, I think what's going on is clearly there's been some pressure for RMB to reevaluate against the dollar. So we all know that the U.S. economy has been doing okay. Even parts of the economy like the labor market and also the real estate market have been recovering pretty steadily, right? I mean, it's not very, very smooth, but it's pretty steadily. And on the other hand, the Chinese economy has run into some bumps, if you look at the aggregate numbers, for example. So, if you just look at the market forces, there should be some adjustment. Now, you could argue, under the old trading regime, there was perhaps too much restrictions on the movement. And so when the pressure was accumulating, and then all of a sudden you allow the trading to be within a bigger band, and that's what you observe. But on the other hand, if you have noticed, pretty much all the other countries, other than the US, you've seen sort of monetary policies and market forces have been pointing that all the major currencies have been weakening against the dollar. And again, that's not surprising, right? Now, the reaction toward the RMB changes have been probably a lot more forceful or stronger. And that's not surprising either because the Chinese economy is the second largest. So when you see the RMB all of a sudden make bigger one-directional movement, you see stronger reaction. So I think this is, I think for the most part, this is still the market forces in play. It's just that this accumulated pressure to reevaluate is being released due to the changing mechanism.
Did the markets overreact to the move?
I don't think the markets per se overreact because you do see the correction, right, or the reevaluation. Maybe the media and the other sectors overreacted, right? Again, I think mainly because the Chinese economy, the status, right, in the world was pretty weak demand overall. So the U.S. is doing okay, but again, U.S. is very much integrating the global economy. It's relying on the global economy to generate demand for its product as well. So if you look at around the globe, the general situation is pretty weak demand. And China being the second largest economy, if the Chinese economy is not doing great, obviously that's gonna worsen the global situation. And at this point, if you see the currency to move in this direction, you know, people react.
If we look at the United States, for example, where a lot of the criticism has been coming from, we've seen critics even in the US Congress saying that China has been manipulating the currency again. Are those arguments really valid? A lot of them have been clamoring for, a lot of the same voices have been clamoring for a more free fluctuation of the renminbi for years now. Hasn't China just given them what they asked for?
Absolutely. I think they're, I don't think they're valid, especially at this point, because the policies, the trading mechanisms now allow to fluctuate more, it's fluctuating more. So that's exactly, the argument has been, let the market speak, don't interfere too much, and I think that's the outcome you're seeing, right? So one, when you see the currency movement, it's just not the RMB. It's pretty much everybody else against the dollar. And then secondly, you got to look at the U.S., okay? What they've been doing ever since the financial crisis, effectively, they have quadrupled the balance sheet of the Fed. So they have printed $1 trillion of money, okay? This is called the QE. But effectively, and this has also prevented the dollar from strengthening against any other currency.
Going back to the economy, we've seen some pretty disappointing economic data for July and for the first 2 quarters, especially if we look at exports, imports, producer prices, and even consumer inflation as well. But focusing on exports for a start, will the depreciation in the Yuan actually help that at all?
I think it will help somewhat, right? But I actually think the help, the assistance of weakening the RMB is pretty limited, okay? Because the importance of the net exporting, right? So you import and export. The Chinese economy is not relying on exporting anymore, okay? It's basically driven by domestic consumption and value add and output, right? So in that effect, I think depreciating the RMB would not help the overall GDP that much. It will stimulate exporting to certain countries a little bit, right?
We also know that China's been very keen on internationalizing the renminbi and on getting the currency included in the International Monetary Fund's reserve basket. Do the changes that the PBOC has made make this more or less likely, and are they good or bad for internationalizing the currency?
I think it's good, but it will be up to the people who decide whether they're going to include RMB in the SDR basket to interpret what they see. Are they seeing market forces playing a more important role in determining the value of RMB? Are they interpreting evidence as as being the RMB is more freely usable by the global markets? Or are they interpreting evidence as saying, oh, the government is interfering again? All right, so I think it's helping, right? Because again, the idea is they change as I said, they change the trading and pricing mechanism that you do see more fluctuation. It turns out the movement is one direction because, as I said, the pressure has been accumulating for the RMB to depreciate or to adjust against international currencies.
Tianjuan, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you.